Good afternoon once again. Once you hear that music, that normally would mean that things are restarting. Thank you for being on time. We'll try to keep up and continue this way. We will now move to the plenary one with a really intriguing title, Kleptocrats, Criminals, Traffickers, and Accomplices. It is time to close their global enterprise. And this very panel discussion will be moderated by Anrike Visser, who is just behind me. And Anrike, the floor is yours. Thank you, and have a fruitful discussion.
Hello? Yes. Of course, we need some technical difficulties as a tradition. Welcome everybody by this plenary. I think it's going to be a very interesting one, not because of me, of course, but because of the amazing panelists that we have today. We will bring together public sector officials, private sector officials from all over the world, from Morocco to Malaysia, the US, and Latvia. So lots of interesting insights to share, and I hope it will be interesting and relevant for all of you. Before I introduce my panelists, let me set the scene briefly for this plenary. You just heard the title, talking about kleptocrats and enablers. And unfortunately, we have to be honest, crime still pays, and financial crime especially. Of course, over the last years, we made some major improvements already. We tightened anti-money laundering regulation, there have been major enforcement cases, and we even managed to define illicit financial flows, thanks to the UN. But at the same time, financial crime is still profitable. Europol estimates that only 2% of the proceeds of crime are frozen in Europe, and only 1% is actually recovered. So, talking about how to close the gaps and really make a fist against financial crime and their accomplices and enablers are our panelists today. Representing the public sector, we have Abigail Bellows at the White House National Security Council, as well as Ilze Znotina, the former head of the Latvian Financial Intelligence Unit. Then we also have Mr. Raymond Baker from Global Financial Integrity, as I'm sure all of you know. We are also honored by the banking sector, Mr. Brahim Benjelloun Touimi from the board of directors of the Bank of Africa in Morocco. An investigative reporter at the end, typing away, writing another report, Mr. Gabriel Labrador from Faro, covering Central America. And finally, all the way to my right, Miss Cynthia Gabriel, the founder of the Center to Combat Corruption and Cronyism in Malaysia. Welcome to everyone. To kick things off, I'd like... Thank you. And with that, I would love to give the floor for opening remarks. Everybody will have 5 minutes to start. Then we'll have a lively debate. And of course, at the end, I'll make sure there's time for questions from the audience. So write them down, because we will make time for you. But first, Abigail, over to you.
Thank you. And I want to thank TI and the IACC Council and the government of Lithuania for pulling together this inspiring conference. As the description notes for this plenary, kleptocrats, criminals, and their accomplices are actively seeking to thwart our agenda. After all, they benefit from the status quo. That means when we fight corruption, we can expect that corruption will fight back. What does that mean for our work in practice? How can we pursue anti-corruption in a way that is sensitive to how contested this issue is and how powerful the entrenched interests are who will likely push back against reform? I'll offer 3 thoughts. One is that we must start with sharp analysis to really understand this fast-moving operational environment. What are the methods that kleptocrats and their accomplices are using to thwart progress across sectors? Which public officials have been co-opted or are seeking to capture state functions for their own ends? It can be hard to do that analysis, but it's vital, and the US government has sought to advance it through resources available to the general public, such as USAID's Dekleptification Guide, and through prioritizing our own intelligence collection and analysis on corrupt actors and networks. Second, bracing for corruption to fight back means bolstering holistic protection support for those on the front lines. Of course, civil society leaders and investigative journalists at the forefront, but also those who may not have as much access to traditional support and emergency assistance. Honest judges, opposition politicians, whistleblowers, bureaucrats with integrity, they are all essential. The US government is scaling up support to anti-corruption defenders, including through seeding new regional networks among journalists, providing legal support against spurious lawsuits through Reporters Shield, and more recently offering fellowships to US universities for anti-corruption activists from Central America. But more still needs to be done, and we very much welcome your partnership on that. Third, an environment of contestation means we must focus on institutionalizing anti-corruption reforms for the long term through enduring changes to policy and practice rather than just relying on individual reformers to safeguard progress. That means building up checks and balances across branches of government, expanding transparency measures that enable the public to more readily hold government to account, both in good times and in bad. These measures can help our anti-corruption approaches keep pace as the tactics of kleptocrats evolve, because we know what the stakes are for development and democracy, for business competitiveness and the environment, and for sovereignty itself, as corruption is weaponized by authoritarian regimes to advance their narrow interests abroad. That is why the very first National Security Study Memorandum that President Biden issued when he came into office established countering corruption as a core national security interest of the United States and tasked the development of our first whole-of-government strategy on this topic, released 2.5 years ago. Since then, we've made strides on a number of fronts, and we're committed to building that elevation of anti-corruption into the DNA of our executive branch, including through the creation of our coordinator role at the State Department and a new dedicated anti-corruption center at USAID. I'll end with an idea shared by my boss, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, at the last IACC. Just as corruption today is more globally integrated than ever, so too must we be more integrated than ever in fighting it, across borders, across donors, across the silos between domestic and foreign policy, and we can't let up. We must know that the path to progress on this topic is not going to be linear, but we must persist in spite of detours and setbacks and do so together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abigail. The next speaker, we're going to make a little change from Ilze to Cynthia, actually. We're going to start with females on this panel. Cynthia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anrike/Annie, who I had a special privilege to call. I am so privileged to be here today. And this is because I'm remembering from 9 years ago at the IACC in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, a really baffling magnitude of a grand corruption was actually exposed by the Department of Justice of the United States. And it was just so coincidental that the IACC was also being held at the same time. And this corruption scandal, called the 1MDB, actually involved no other than our former Prime Minister. He's in jail now after many years of trying to look for justice and find for accountability with government. I wanted to remember this because 9 years down the road, we're still talking about how to end the global enterprise, how to end the game of criminals, how to end the game of kleptocrats, and how to actually beat them to their own game. So unfortunately, from all the work that has been done, I feel very much, and I'm speaking also from activism, from advocacy, from legal work, etc., that we're just scratching the surface. We're not actually there where the solutions need to be made. And I'm really grateful that this panel has a cross-sector of people because it is really about collective action approaches that is really required to move what has actually been started as a side effect of economic globalization and unfortunately of democracy itself, because we also see enablers like lawyers, accountants, bankers, etc. All of these are part of the world that we live in now, and people that we rely on for very specific services. And then there are service providers and consultants and many different types of occupation that now have become suspect, and the spotlight of corruption is also on these enablers. And are we actually in that space where we can actually tackle corruption effectively? So from my experience in 2015, it has been baffling, it has been mysterious, and it has been very, very enriching in terms of learning what grand corruption is. Because from civil society, we were pushed to the front line to actually blow the whistle, to do investigative work, work with journalists. And the one lesson that we learned immediately was, as much as the government was trying to put the lid on us locally, we depended on a lot of foreign journalists, investigating groups, many different entities that were actually working to help solve such a baffling crime, which involves, unfortunately, after 9 years today, we still have problems with asset recovery, which is really quite in limbo. Some amounts of money are being returned to us, and much of it is actually lost. We don't have enough global order or rules to actually determine how assets can be returned. We are still having perpetrators out there, so they cannot be charged because they left the country and they're being protected by notorious governments out there, and we have no way of actually trying to get to them. And the police and the Interpol say, yeah, we are trying to find them, we're looking for them, but after 9 years, some of the main culprits and kleptocrats and their accomplices are still out at large. And I also wanted to talk about some of the UNCAC principles that governments have actually ratified and adopted that haven't actually been able to work when it comes to global and grand corruption. And this is something I think really needs to be tackled. One of it is international cooperation. And we all know, we're all global leaders out there, we know how international cooperation is so essential to bring transnational crime grand corruption and corruption across borders to actually find some kind of solution. So we're talking, of course, beneficial ownership has become a riding success in many countries. And investors now are telling Malaysia, you have to actually put in better financial systems and better order in order for us to come in. So that actually, for me, means we need to get and engage the business community very, very directly, because they are part of the problem, part of the solution, as the previous plenary had mentioned. And we really need to talk to those people who are causing a lot of the issues we are trying to tackle. So the bankers, the criminal sectors, the different people who enable such cross-border corruption to take place. Now, I know I have 7 minutes, but I just wanted to say one more thing about solutions, or will you actually give us time to do that later?
Yes,
okay,
I will
thank
ask you a
you.
question
So that's just the opening of remembering from 2015. I think we do need to actually think ahead about how we can work together to solve the problem.
Totally. Thank you. I promise I will come back to you about the solutions later on. But first, over to Raymond.
Thank you, Anrike. When Charles Davidson and Tom Cardamone and I formed Global Financial Integrity in 2006, among the first conversations we had was, what do we call this stuff that we're going to be dealing with, this illegal money that is shifting across borders? I had just published my first book, Capitalism's Achilles Heel, and it was subtitled Dirty Money. We all agreed we can't call this stuff dirty money. If we do, we'll make rooms full of enablers, lawyers and bankers and accountants go running for the exits. So what do we call this stuff? After a great deal of discussion, we finally decided to call this dirty money illicit financial flows. You got to admit, that sounds much more sophisticated. It just, it's the same thing, it just sounds better. But with a great deal of effort, we got that terminology implanted into the global vocabulary. It's now officially used by almost all countries of the world. With Tom Cardamone's hard work, we got it into the Sustainable Development Goals. The World Bank representative used it this morning when he was talking. So illicit financial flows is what we call this stuff. Illicit financial flows are enabled by a massive financial secrecy system, which comprises a number of elements. First of all, tax havens. Back in the 1950s and early 60s, there were only 3 or 4 tax havens around the world. Today, they're somewhere between 75 and 150, depending on how you count it. Almost all of these tax havens are also secrecy jurisdictions. That is to say, money can come in and money can go out without ever identifying where it came from and where it's going. A key part of this financial secrecy system is disguised corporations, shell companies, more of them having been created in my country, the United States, than in any other countries. Anonymous trust accounts are part of this structure. You can do pretty much the same thing with a trust account that you can do with a shell company. Fake foundations are part of this structure. When you make your first $1 billion or billion euros, you can establish a charitable foundation. You can donate your money to your charitable foundation, and you can designate yourself the beneficiary of the charity of your foundation, escaping taxes at every step along the way. And then there are some beautiful little things called hybrid entities that can look like a corporation under one country's laws and a partnership under another country and a trust account in another country. And you can just shift money back and forth between these hybrid entities. You can make an income look like an expense. You can make an asset look like a liability. You can do anything you want with these hybrid entities. And then there are a number of money laundering techniques that are used for specialized purposes to shift money across borders. And then finally, a key element of this system is that there are holes left in the laws of Western countries to facilitate the movement of money through this financial secrecy system and ultimately into our own economies. Now, something needs to knit together the operation of this financial secrecy system. And that something is falsified trade. Falsified trade is trade in which invoice values do not accord to real values. Invoice prices can be one thing, real value can be something else entirely. By manipulating the invoice value, you can shift money back and forth across borders. This is the key means by which the financial secrecy system operates. Major point that I want to make is that the major elements of the financial secrecy system have been created by enablers in the richer Western countries. Very little of this has been created by kleptocrats or criminals or traffickers or others we like to blame. No, by far the greater part of this financial secrecy system has been created by us for the purpose of moving money from criminal to legitimate, from corrupt to respectable, and from poor to rich. And it does this tens of thousands of times every day. So when we talk about enablers, I want to make the point as clearly as possible. We are, for the most part, talking about ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You got a very good applause from that, and I think it's a very good point, and I have lots of questions. But let me first give the floor to our next lovely speaker from the banking sector, Brahim.
Thank you, Anrike. I would like first to thank warmly AICC to have invited the representative of a Pan-African bank present in 32 countries, out of them 20 in Africa, and more specifically 18 in sub-Saharan Africa. I have come, actually, probably one of the few bankers to have been invited to testimony that in Morocco, challenges are in sub-Saharan Africa. We may not find institutionally mechanism for enablers, mechanism. We have the luck to have a very sound central bank. The Wali, the governor, had been voted regularly as one of the best central bankers. So we have, Morocco has anticipated on a certain number of measures and laws which prevent a lot of difficulties that we're witnessing elsewhere. I would like to talk more specifically about Bank of Africa. Bank of Africa, we are certified. We've been probably the first in Africa, first in Morocco for sure, even before the Central Bank of Morocco, to have been certified ISO 37001, which is the certification anti-corruption management system. It's very important because when we hear what have been discussed this morning, how could we encounter enablers, even if the issue has changed? I picked up some ideas about the strengthening of regulatory framework, enhancing supervision and oversight, promoting transparency and accountability, AML measures, foster a culture of integrity, leverage technology, strengthen whistleblowing protectors, enhancing international cooperation, improve international control and governance, and engage stakeholders. All these elements are encapsulated in a norm. Indeed, it's not the panacea, but at least you have something at your disposal as an institution in order to, once again, have a system which prevent, or at least help prevent corruption. Normative corpus, it's 8 components. Normative corpus, whistleblowing system, risk mapping, diligence with customers and third parties, diligence on exposed functions, training and awareness, internal and external audits, and reporting. So, the first conviction I would like to share is that probably this kind of mechanism should be absolutely generalized. And we have the chance to have the Central Bank of Morocco, who has imposed on, not imposed, I mean, very gently asked the banks to go through this process. We started voluntarily, but now through a directive from this central bank dating from 2022, it is conducing the commercial bank to go through this process. Out of the 19 banks in Morocco, 5 are already certified. The other conviction is probably, and it goes beyond this time, this banking sector. I heard this morning very interesting presentations, and among them the one of Mr. Sanjay Pradhan, who talked about norms who could be enlarged to government. I think we deserve to have this kind of ICO being concerning also government entities in order to once again institutionalize this mechanism against corruption, and maybe beyond that, all these components of an open government should also be probably encapsulated in norm. And likewise, we have countries which are scored or rated according to a certain number of things that they take, that they comply with. We would have countries and public entities complying with these norms. Once again, it's not the panacea, but it's strong will, and once again encapsulates a lot of things, a lot of mechanisms that are very useful. I will finish. We are committed to this fight against corruption. I would like to believe that if the acronym of BOABG, Bank of Africa, BMCE Group, which are our full name, it may be, hopefully in the near future, means the Bank of Anti-Bribery Group. Thank you.
Thank you so much. An interesting perspective combining the external and the internal for the bank. I have lots of questions about that as well, but first I would love to go to the former head of the Latvian FAU, to my right, Ilze.
Okay. Thank you, Anrike, and thank you for the organizers for this excellent event. I really looking to my Lithuanian colleagues with kind of like positive greed that we have something like this in our neighborhood. I know how focused our Lithuanian colleagues in fighting corruption, and I'm happy that you succeeded with organizing something like this, and of course for ICCC for the conference itself. So. Having been titled as former, I thought that maybe I should clarify what it means to be former head of FIU, and do we really have somebody former who sometimes, from time to time, has been involved in fighting financial crime? I believe not. So, although I has been in a position of leading financial intelligence unit in Latvia from 2018 to 2022, I still have my heart with financial intelligence and fighting financial crime. And if we speak about financial crime enablers, I think I'm very well positioned to speak about this topic because my background, I'm a lawyer, I'm attorney at law, which means that I, for 20 years, have acted as representative in the courts. Moreover, or on top of this, I've been partner with Deloitte, so which means consultant. Again, accountants around me, financial consultants, tax advisors, lawyers, whom I led myself. forensic people, and that was the journey how I got into the Financial Intelligence Unit, which is, of course, something which everybody knows, and I hope that you know, that is the institution that is trying to trace illicit financial flows. And if something I will take from this conference, now I know whom to blame for this term, illicit financial flows, because for those who are not English speakers, that always creates some problem, how to translate that in our local laws, this term, and how not to allow enablers, mostly lawyers, to translate in a way that we cannot go after them and after those who are laundering illicit flows or illicit funds. Anyway, I got into the Financial Intelligence Unit when my country, which is neighboring Lithuania, Latvia, got into really huge trouble with laundering money, with trying to advertise itself on a political level as the bridge between East and West. And you should read it between Russia and CIS countries and Western part of the world, which built a financial system that, again, advertised as the Northern Switzerland, offering services in Russian language, offering very quick way how to transfer that money that was stolen in those countries to the Western Europe, to US, to Australia, to any other part of the world very quickly. Besides, Latvia is the same as Lithuania from 2004 is in European Union, which means that our banking system should apply European Union rules. But as you know, we are still in a position that even today, in 2024, the rules across the Europe are not unified. So, of course, those gaps were abused by our bankers. As I said, our politicians also benefited from this. At least they believe that the country benefits from this. And during this extensive and very intense focus on being this bridge or the channel between Russia and CIS countries and to the West, we got into trouble when in 2018, it was February, when US Treasury agency FinCEN, which is the same Financial Intelligence Unit / Financial Service Authority, announced that the third largest bank in Latvia has orchestrated money laundering, has supported the evasion of sanctions, North Korea sanctions and other sanctions, have bribed officials, and therefore should be, if we may say so, blacklisted, which means that no other banks could operate or have cooperation with that particular bank. Third largest bank. And Latvia got into such a huge trouble that basically it meant that everything of this service line that Latvia offered has ruined in a couple of days. Bank got into liquidation, and I got into the Financial Intelligence Unit because for the first time in my life, I thought that maybe that's the time when I should go into the competition for the head of FIU. That position was opened, and we should try to somehow solve this problem and regain the reputation of my country. 4 years in that position allowed me to say that the biggest problem was not just that one bank or the banking system. Of course, banks cannot do anything without those who are supporting business transactions, who are consulting, who are representing clients in courts. And if we speak about the enablers, and I would like to speak more about the non-financial sector enablers, of course, we have to speak about my profession, which is lawyers, first instance, which still, even today, in 2024, are nicely abusing, if I may say so, the fact that, or the principle of access to justice and expanding this principle in a way that it was never meant to be. So what we did, I know that Anrike most probably wants to kind of like cut off me here, but I will just explain very, very briefly what was the biggest success of our FIU, but it was not just our FIU, it was more than us. knowing how big is the problem with that particular bank, ABLV bank, what we did, we analyzed all the information that we had in our hands on the transactions of bank for last 5 years and distributed that information to those countries that were more involved or more suffering from the operations of ABLV bank. In that way, we created a task force, international collaboration task force, which we called International Financial Intelligence Task Force, or IFIT. And those 25 countries, initially afterwards we became more than 30, we cooperated for 3 years, worked together in analysis of what? Not so much bankers itself, but those enablers who were part of the ABLV network. If somebody of you may know from, for example, OCCRP reports, IOS Group, or maybe you know some famous names like Erik Vanagelis, which by the way is Latvian. Not really, but like he resides in Latvia. Nobody has seen him, but we know the name. So IOS Group, different lawyers, different trust companies, service providers, notaries, real estate agents, accountants, and tax advisors were the focus group of our intelligence task force. And that allowed us really to understand how big and global is that network of professional enablers. And it not only allowed us to understand how big is the network and how well connected it is, but also, of course, very clearly see which governments support this, which governments are in favor of this. And at the end of the day, in 2022, right like 3 weeks after I was my my government, my parliament did not reappoint me for the second term, and I believe that was the success of all those corrupt individuals whom we fighted there. 3 weeks later, my FIU, my colleagues received a BECA award. BECA means Best Egmont Case Award. Egmont is the organization that unites all the financial intelligence units for this international cooperation effort. And the main conclusion of this is that you have to have political will to fight enablers, you have to have resource, understanding, and the most important, innovative collaborative means. If you will not collaborate, you will never success with fighting enablers. That's the main message that we convened during this session when we got BECA award. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and sorry for giving you a few minutes extra, but it was a really interesting case. Last but not least, I want to make sure we have time for a very different part of the world, actually, Central America. Gabriel.
Well, thank you. Since I have just only 5 minutes, and English is not my natural language, mother language, I will read something briefly, because in order to stop crime and in order to stop financial crime, we need something very basic. It's democracy. And I'm going to remember that by telling the story of my country, recent story. It's something that happened 90 years ago, 9 decades ago, but it's still ongoing. So I come from El Salvador, where President Nayib Bukele has aggressively dismantled all democratic institutions, institutions that tried very hard to stabilize democracy in the country after our 20-year-long civil war. The war ended in '92. I'm not exaggerating when I say that there is no institution at this moment capable of imposing limits to the decisions made by President Bukele. Bukele himself poses a great threat to the rule of law by one single fact. The Constitution of El Salvador states in 6 articles that no president is allowed for an immediate second term. And yet, you can imagine what I'm going to say. Bukele did so by pretending to leave office 6 months before the end of his mandate, so he could say that he was not reelected, but simply being elected for a second term. Yeah, the magic of words, right? Right now, El Salvador does not live in a democracy anymore. Bukele controls the 3 branches of government. He was elected in 2019. Then in 2021, his party won the control of the National Assembly. According to the public records, including a US indictment in the New York Eastern District Court, Bukele won these elections due to the fact that one criminal organization, a street gang known as MS-13, threatened people and made people go and vote for new ideas. Nuevas Ideas, the party of the president. With the majority, he forcibly dismissed, with the majority in the National Assembly, Bukele forcibly dismissed the members of the highest court in the country, the Constitutional Court. And also, this is very important, he dismissed the Attorney General, which, by the way, he was investigating significant corruption cases related to the pandemic, public contracts, and other topics, and, of course, the negotiations, secret negotiations between the Bukele administration and the gang leaders, including MS-13. There's no independence in the judiciary. Again, the National Assembly, controlled by Bukele, broke the law to name other magistrates of the Supreme Court. So now Bukele has 10 of the 15 seats. In 2021, the National Assembly also dismissed 30% of the judges in the country under allegations of corruption. But if you read the paper, the decree, it says only that the only reason why judges would should be dismissed is because of their age. 60 years or older, then you are corrupt. No offense, guys. Then, step by step, Bukele gained power. Now he's trying to control all public information and the media. Also, there's a concealment of public information and lack of accountability. The High Commissioners of the Public Information Institute have practically dismantled the public information law. Also, there's a use of security forces and the judicial system for political ends. And there is also a persecution of the opposition and critical voices, including the press. Since March 2022, the government enforces an exception regime, a state of emergency that has caused that El Salvador is now the country with the highest incarceration rate in the world. Nearly 2.5% of our population is in jail right now. Since March 2022, 80,000 Salvadorians are in prison under allegation of being gang members, street gang members. There's also systematic torture in prisons, absence of rule of law, and in prisons we have like almost 300 people have died in prison without any investigation. So this derailment of democracy enables a lot of crimes, right? But trying to fit in this table, I will say that Bukele and his National Assembly also approved this law, this Bitcoin law, you probably heard of it, which enables Bitcoin to be one of the public legal tenders in the country. And there's a lot of, I guess Raymond can talk about this more properly, but of course, crypto poses a great threat for transparency, accountability, and many things. There are many properties being sold with Bitcoin, and also the government has making a lot of investment and its constructions with Bitcoin, and there's nothing that there's no transparency, and no one can bring accountability with that. So I don't know if I run out of time, right? Yeah, so
yes,
I'm going to leave it there. Much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to all the panelists. I really like that we went around the world from every sector, banking, public, and of course civil society and media, which are essential in shining light on these issues. I don't think I'll have time for all the questions, but I wanted to start with a question to Abigail and Ilze. How can the US and the EU better harmonize your approach to enablers of corruption?
We have long recognized the vulnerabilities in our financial system that corrupt and criminal actors have exploited to launder or stash their ill-gotten gains. And that's why the Biden administration is putting so much weight behind plugging those holes, including through our new beneficial ownership regime, our very active rulemaking processes on investment advisors and real estate, and other initiatives. This spring, the US was actually upgraded by the Financial Action Task Force in terms of our implementation of a key technical standard on beneficial ownership, which is a testament to the good work that we're doing to strengthen our regulatory frameworks. At the last IACC, National Security Advisor Sullivan also endorsed the Enablers Act, which, as some may know, would expand AML regulations, requirements on accountants, lawyers, and other professional service providers. But at the end of the day, the impact kind of will come when the rubber meets the road. That's in enforcement, regardless of what the regulations are. And there, the U.S. government is already quite leading the pack. We maintain among the most effective frameworks globally for actually pursuing investigations, prosecutions, asset recovery, financial sanctions and visa sanctions, all different kinds of accountability for criminals and those who steal from the public.
Thank you so much, Abigail. Ilse?
Yeah, I was listening to Abigail and thinking that I will have to ask you a question about the Enablers Act, but then you responded that it is already like ongoing. To me, I think European Union has one of the best legislative environments where the enablers are at least try to tackle. Most of our countries in the European Union have recognized that the lawyers or non-financial sector has to report and be regarded as the reporting individuals or entities for the purposes of AML system. So they have to also really check their clients, check the monies that they receive or they are paying for one or another transaction. We have very good regime on beneficial ownership, and just very recently the AML package was adopted in parallel, also establishing AML authority, which will have a power to really to call together different supervisory authorities and financial intelligence units. At the same time, very important message was brought by Abigail about the enforcement. One thing is really to have a legislative, like the background or legislative basis for tackling enablers. Another thing is the ethical understanding or the application of ethical rules by those non-financial sector representatives like lawyers, advisors, consultants. And another thing is how well we enforce, even if we don't have like legislative means, how to get those lawyers by their hands when they are helping or enabling. And there I think European Union is lagging behind. Unfortunately, I haven't seen many cases where the lawyers have been brought to court for supporting those who are laundering the funds or creating schemes, or trust company service providers who are creating those shell companies that are used tens and thousands of them in order to really to go into this illicit financial flows trace. So I would say if there is just one solution from my experience. Again, I will call for collaboration. And if there are so many people in the room who are fighting corruption, just a few years ago, I was here in Vilnius talking to the anti-corruption bodies and trying to explain them how follow the money rule can help tackling corruption. And to my big surprise, most of the anti-corruption bodies didn't know that such financial intelligence unit exists and that we can help. And at least one thing, start to collaborate between anti-corruption bodies and financial intelligence units, start to really understand each other, start to understand those concepts of beneficial ownership. There's no time anymore when somebody with the suitcase will bring the money. As we already noticed that there's a Bitcoin issue, there are shell companies issue, like everything becomes so complicated. So collaboration and understanding of each other's interests is very important.
Thank you so much, Ilze. A question for Raymond. Really great of highlighting the role of also Western countries in facilitating illicit financial flows. I'm going to use the term, of course. Something else that is often overlooked, though, is the severity of the impact, both for developing economies as well as advanced economies. Would you like to remark about that, please?
Sure. The consequences are staggering. Let's address various categories of this in order. Global crime. Global crime is growing faster than global GDP. In other words, we are steadily losing the battle against global crime. Corruption. When I talk about corruption, I'm talking about money stolen by government officials. In our work, we focus on the cross-border flow of that. Through the efforts of Transparency International and other organizations, this has been curtailed out of a lot of countries. Having said that, today the cross-border flow of corrupt money may be at the highest levels ever. Principally because of what's coming out of China and out of Russia. Our estimate for China, very conservatively, is $4 trillion in foreign accounts. For Russia, $1 trillion in foreign accounts. These are the kinds of magnitudes that we've never seen before. Kleptocracy, which is part of the title of what we're dealing with here. This is a growing worldwide problem. Kleptocrats make use of the global financial secrecy system themselves, or have oligarchs to do the dirty work for them. We in the richer Western countries almost always find some way to take in the proceeds offered to us from kleptocrats abroad. The developing countries. This has been a major part of my focus for more than 60 years. Across my career, I think I have seen more crime and more corruption and more money laundering and more tax evasion, and at the same time, more poverty than anyone of my acquaintance. This is both infuriating and heartbreaking. Billions of people are deprived of the wealth of their nations because so much is shifted out into our willing Western economies. The reality is that poverty and inequality are the fact of life in scores of countries. Take my country, the United States. When I finished my university education, the ratio between workers' wages and executive compensation was 20 to 1. Today, that ratio is more than 400 to 1. Now, that's not all due to the financial secrecy system, but part of it is in the ways in which executives can shelter and hide their money that are just not available to the poor and the middle class. I gave a talk in Manchester, England, some years ago on this kind of subject matter. And in the question and answer session, a woman asked me, she said, well, if we curtail this money coming out of Africa and Latin America and Asia and so forth, won't it hurt our economy? Won't it hurt our stock markets? Won't it hurt our pension funds? And I said to her, maybe marginally, maybe a 0.5% or 1% or something like that. But that's not the question. The question is, what percent of your standard of living is worth someone else's liberty, someone else's life? That's the question that we have to address. Billions around the world are living deprived existences. What of their loss is worth our gain? Inequality is soaring all over the world, and we're dealing, and that means primarily you are dealing with an existential threat to the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raymond. I have time for one more question, and then I want to turn it over to the audience. So get ready. I already see hands going up, so I'll come to you soon. But first, I promised Cynthia to talk about solutions, and I won't take that opportunity away from her.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we left this panel with some concrete ideas on how to move forward. And there's so many good thinkers on this panel as well. So I just wanted to get back to the point of building consensus. And I think we've done quite well on trying to get more governments, more civil society, more private sector to be interested, to understand the damages of grand corruption and transnational crime and how it links with corruption on many facets. But we need to do much more. And I think we need to strategize on how to get more stakeholders on board. So back to my second point about successful examples like the OGP and maybe the EITI, where you have a multi-stakeholder kind of approach of government, civil society, and business to actually come together on the same table to start looking for solutions. Because even if we understand that private sector is an important element in trying to fight corruption, it seems like some of the efforts around business integrity is so mild and so weak that the impact is not really being felt, especially by how multinational companies come, set base in our countries, and so on. But the other really important thing I think we need to find, perhaps at this IACC, is the work that is being done around legal definition of grand corruption. Because we might all have different understanding of what grand corruption is, but it's really important to have some kind of fundamental basis on what that definition might be, so that we can actually take law enforcement to be more accountable, to actually track criminals and so on. And linked to that is actually something that I thought was very lacking when we were trying to get over the 1MDB scandal until today, is the criminal justice system, which is still focused on domestic jurisdiction, but we're not able to actually track the criminals and the kleptocrats once they leave the country or across border. How can we have better global rules to get them and to get them to stop the game so that we can get ahead? So there's some thinking that needs to be done through all of these things. And of course, at country level, I just wanted to promote that because I live in Malaysia and I actually experience the kind of intimidation, the fear and the harassment when you try to hold powerful people to account, especially the most powerful, like our former Prime Minister. You find that there is no whistleblower protection. There is so much vulnerability in calling out corruption that only someone crazy would want to stay in this field to actually find solutions to it. So it's daunting and it's intimidating. And what are we doing about trying to promote and protect whistleblower protection is also something that, I mean, it's close to many of our hearts. But what I do want to say about this is we had an opposition that rode on a good governance ticket. They won after 60 years of another party in rule. But when they come into power, that seems to be like something so easy to do, but it's not. It's so difficult for them to even develop and change a law into something that will protect whistleblowers. So I want to bring this high conversation also back to the local and to country level. So it's just some thinking that I did, and I think the experts here might be able to put a lot more thought into it, and everyone here who do so much work in their respective groups.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Maybe we're all a little bit crazy to take on this big task, I would say. I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience. The lady here up front.
Thank you very much. My name is Alina Radu, and I am a journalist from Moldova. And my question is about the missing part. I miss very much the part that participate in global corruption, and this is the tech giants. All the corruption crimes are made now in a digital world. All the illegal transfers, all the trolling farms, all the attacks on activists and journalists, all the disinformation, all the promoting of corrupt politicians is made on tech giants and on Facebook platforms, TikTok and so on. They are not here. How do you think? Can we at least politely invite them here to stay on stage? And if they don't want to answer our question, can we invite them just to sit there and to listen to this global anti-corruption talk? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can I?
I will take 2 questions, 3 questions, and then I'll go to the panelists. Sir, over to you, here up front.
Thank you. My name is Shakil Shabir. I'm a member of Parliament of Kenya, chairman of the African Parliamentarians Against Corruption. I say this to Cynthia. In 2015, it was myself, Peter Regan, and 2 others that went onto the podium to stop the Prime Minister 20 minutes before the speech. We tried everything. In the end, we had to take that action. You were there, perhaps. What I'm trying to say is, we did that. We were foreigners. Why don't you build on those type of actions? Because I know every time I go to Malaysia, they remember what we did. And I think like TI, like African Parliamentarians Against Corruption, and other parties, legislators like us, need to be working with you to try and make what is the difficult decisions. We made that difficult decision. That's if Peter Hagen was here, I think that is one of the top things that we ever can say in my life, that we stop somebody. You cannot stop a Prime Minister 20 minutes before he gives a speech. We stopped him. So we have a lot of power. And the only thing is, how are you going to put that power together? How are you going to interact with us? How are you going to work with legislatures as well? Because all the time, it seems you're only working with the executive and the others and civil society, etc. It is about time that you worked with legislators. Thank you.
Thank you. And one final question, if somebody has. Yeah, over there.
Thank you very much. I have a question based on what you, Gabriel, mentioned. You mentioned that 30% of judges who are fighting corruption were actually charged with corruption. We also see this in private sector, where the whistleblower hotlines and compliance channels are frequently misused. So ultimately, we're getting reports in bad faith. So what is the panel's recommendation on how we stop that misuse, stop the corrupted actors using our language?
Thank you. Maybe Gabriel, you want to respond to the final question?
Yes.
First?
Well, how we stop them to use our language? Oh. I'll say something related to disinformation and misinformation. I think we have to keep it simple always. I mean, people in the streets talk a very different way, and they understand things in a different manner. Sometimes a very high elite talking doesn't help. So maybe it's time for us to change the language and keep it simple. The new platforms, social media, it's very helpful in that sense. And I have seen many channels talking about how to fight corruption. I mean, youngsters, people in the market talking about that, and I feel inspired by that, because there's a shift in how we put the problem to the people. And related to that, I feel that journalism has a big mission to accomplish, to tackle disinformation. And by that, we just simply got to keep on moving and making journalism, investigation. I was in Mexico a few weeks ago with a colleague of here, and we were like 10 of us trying to think how to tackle disinformation, misinformation, and whatever. And the conclusion after 4 days of talks was that there's no easy solution. We have to just like get attached to people once again and be relevant to people by talking what they need to do. Sometimes they don't like what we say. That's the case of El Salvador, but they need our information. I would say that.
And Abigail, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you. Building on that and the comment from Moldova, what we're seeing so often is that corruption is one gateway for foreign malign influence. And so this disinformation, it's not coming out of thin air. It's being purposefully advanced by the parties that benefit from corruption, whether that's domestic forces, kind of homegrown corruption, or foreign-backed corruption, strategic corruption coming in. And that, I would say, is one of the changes that we've seen over the last 10 years, is that corruption is increasingly a tool of foreign policy from malign actors trying to subvert sovereignty, subvert democracy, increase their dominance in other countries. And if you think about the panoply of tools available to them, the sort of hybrid warfare tool set, you could, attack directly, attack militarily, high cost, high visibility. Corruption is sometimes a much more efficient route at the same ends. If you can buy your way into the policies that benefit your state-owned enterprises or your country, that can be a quite efficient route at gaining a foothold in another state. And in that regard, that's part of what's animated the US government's elevation of this issue, is recognizing corruption not just as a moral problem, a democracy problem, a development problem, but also a strategic problem and a geostrategic problem. And in that regard, we're very much calling on other donors, bilateral donors, funders of all sorts, to join us in advancing their investments in anti-corruption. This is a time where the issue is increasing in priority, but actually, if you look at the funding levels, they've often stagnated or sometimes decreased. And so we have an Integrity for Development campaign that is trying to kind of rally greater collective action among the funding community out of recognition of the existential threat that corruption poses. And I'll just say one other thing in terms of communications, as we think to confront, how corruption language has been co-opted by the corrupt in some instances, or anti-corruption language has been co-opted. I think one of the things in puncturing that is not just sharing and exposing the problem, which we're all good at, but also offering solutions and hope. Because we see so often that sometimes exposure to corruption can actually decrease civic engagement in certain instances, because people become so resigned and kind of fatalistic about what impact they can have. And so that's, I think, one of the promise or the ideas behind this global anti-corruption consortium that we're proud to support along with many others, because it's linking journalists and activists to create a pathway so that when you read the news and you're depressed by some corruption scandal, you actually see the way where you can have some agency in impacting it. And it's actually resulted in lots of policy impacts and so on. So I think finding a way to talk through solutions journalism and a communication language around corruption that includes hope is an important component of the story.
100%. Thank you, Abigail. Then maybe Cynthia, the question from the parliamentarian from Kenya, focusing on how can civil society not just work with the senior executive, but also with lower parliamentarians.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I just also wanted to answer a little bit more broadly that one of the most important things about staying and fighting corruption and following grand corruption is to be an optimist. You cannot give up when you cannot find solutions. So to be optimistic is really a very important part of the whole thing about trying to actually get to how the money was stolen, looking for data, and so on and so forth. But the other thing is also that we now live in a world of tech and AI, and almost everyone has mobile phones and gadgets, etc. It's to learn how to be more curious and investigative, because we don't just take photos of food or ourselves, but we take photos of what could sound or smell a little fishy or suspicious. And then we have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have TikTok, and I noticed that social media has changed a lot of that behavioral, cultural attitudes, and people are becoming more brave. And so now laws around the internet are also being developed, etc. But it's about actually multiplying these efforts so that we know that more people understand about anti-corruption and able to actually take the discussions to the table where we can change policy and we can actually impact public policy in an effective way. But what I do want to also say is that journalists, parliamentarians, lawyers become very essential sectors of people that we need to work with. So in the case of some countries, Parliament is also seen as a marketplace where parliamentarians also do business, and there are no laws around conflict of interest, and so the corruption fuels itself in many ways. So it's really important to actually develop rules around this. One good thing that has happened with us after that whole crisis of 1MDB and other corruption scandals is we now have select committees, all-party parliamentary groups, which we never had ever before. But it's really about one that is also focusing purely on anti-corruption. And that is the good work of civil society and different actors to actually make sure that we are able to put a lot of the reform issues on the table for parliamentarians. For journalists, I think one of the most important lessons around this is to map corruption cases, to learn how to map and to actually connect the dots on who are the stakeholders that are involved before you actually write a story, because you could be charged for defamation. civil society groups could be charged for defamation. Like my group, we've had so many letters of demand, but because we are so thorough with the information that we revealed, that it's impossible to actually charge us for anything. So,
thank you. I'm gonna cut you off there. Finally, I wanted to give some time to Ilze to talk about the question from Moldova and disinformation.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking about this question, not in a sense that you asked the question about the technology companies, but more on, for example, like something which is more simple, like fraud. And all of us have seen the investment fraud, the messages that we receive through the telecom operators that your bank account has been frozen for various reasons, provide us with, I don't know, details of how to unblock this, and then we just see that money flows out of the account and you can never get them back. On the other hand, and of course, that would be nice to have a technology companies in the room to discuss with them those issues that we are discussing right now. But on the other hand, I truly believe that in order to tackle the problem, we should not expand so much as to the companies that might be not aware how to really trace these illicit activities. Why I'm saying this, I might sound a bit schizophrenic, but right now I represent the business. I'm an executive board member of a large energy company, and what I'm trying to do right now is really to convince my ex-colleagues, some other counterparts from the public sector, let's create some kind of public-private partnership, as I created myself, and I was in FIU, very successful public-private partnership where we vertically, horizontally, between public-public, private-private, and et cetera, cooperated and shared the information. Why I'm asking my colleagues to do something like this? Because even though I have plenty of knowledge how to understand beneficial ownership issues, how to really trace who is behind the one or another investor, I still don't possess that knowledge that could be shared by those who are participants in a room, who could talk to those technology companies and explain to them what exactly is needed in order to really do something. So unless we are not talking openly with the companies, with the business, we cannot expect them to understand what to do. So that's similar if we would require, I don't know, if some smuggler is bringing cocaine from, let's say, Central America to Europe, we would charge shipping company. That is not the case how we are doing this. So what I'm saying is to talk language, the common language with the companies, we should start with explaining them what is happening. But first of all, we have to understand ourselves. And everybody should do what they are required to do. Financial intelligence units raise the flags when they see that there is suspicious transactions. Investigators investigate corruption, and businesses should do business on integrity rules, based on integrity rules. But if I may very quickly jump on the defamation and all that stuff, that is also very important. I must say that not only civil society might face something like this. I myself, as the head of Financial Intelligence Unit, was sued in a court for defamation. You know who did it? That was the member of parliament who said that I have defamated him because I said that he represents ABLV, bank's interests. And of course, I said to you that I was myself a litigator, so I won the case. But I was there for 2 years litigating for myself. And what happens right now, when ABLV is one of the examples where the shareholders, the main managers, and those trust company service providers and lawyers who created all that laundromat scheme around the ABLV are in the court. Right now I'm going to the court, and this is the session for a whole day, 6 hours on my feet, answering their questions. So we must be brave, but at the same time, the benefits and this value that we create is just enormous, and it feels so good, at least to have one on the courtroom, seeing that what you did investigating is having some results. So I encourage everybody, not just those who are in this room, but broader society, really not to lose faith in our fight.
Thank you. Raymond.
I've watched corruption go through three stages. First of all, what I call straight out corruption. For example, the finance minister who was known as Mr. 10%. The next level is grand corruption, where many elements of the country get involved in corruption. And the third level is state capture. Where the purpose of the state becomes the generation of corrupt money. I've known lots of corrupt government officials in my day. I've never known one that had any difficulty getting his money into a foreign bank account.
Thank you. Very true. Yeah? Brahim.
Well, I understand that the focus is on government, on parliament, etc. But I would like to underline the major role of the banking sector, where we could have had a pool of enablers, and thanks God, the new system being in place, called new prudential system beyond Basel I, Basel II, Basel III, is called Supervisory Review and Evaluation Process. What does it mean? It's bringing something very interesting. When you are not complying with one of the pillars of the system, among which compliance to AML, compliance in our country, combat financing of terrorism, it is the shareholders who pay through add-on capital. Why? Because banks are scored from 1 to 4. The one is being the best, the grade, the second one second best. The third, you start to have concern. You start to put money, shareholder money, against these weaknesses, i.e., it's no more a question only of moral. It's a question you hurt financiers in their portfolio. And they wouldn't stand having these weaknesses in these mechanisms because they have to put money add-on capital. What does it mean very concretely? The solvency ratio is something key which enabled the bank to lend money according to a proportion of this money which is that it owns. When you have these weaknesses, this minimum is raised up to 4% above the minimum. So the shareholders feel the pain if ever there are weaknesses. So I'm very optimistic about the fact that the banking sector, and essentially we in Africa, since Morocco is really leading the way in the northern part of Morocco, and because it's present also in sub-Saharan African countries, in order to bring all these countries to the best standard that we're trying to put in place in Morocco. So it's very important once again. So this is the, and I would finally, finish with an idea. I think that at the heart of all this commitment is the corporate social responsibility that we, for our part, we introduced in 1995. Why is it important? Because it encompasses all these dimensions, among them this dimension of integrity. And this is how we, the shouldership of Bank of Africa has attracted people like DFI, the largest one in the world, which is the British one, British Investment International, for example. But once again, it should be, all these questions should become mainstream for users of banking. It should be something which is the compliance with rules. And it will defend much more strongly than having only moral or any, how could I say, it's much more important to have things to apply rather than to be always talking about morale, etc. It's much more efficient to have a kind of mechanism that they have to implement. Whatever they think. It's a little bit cynical, but I just show that sometimes automaticity will play its role, and essentially in banking system. Thank you.
Thank you, Brahim. I will take 2 final questions from the audience, and then we have to close, unfortunately. One, sir, right over there at the back. And a second, oh, here, yes, sorry, I didn't see you there. Thank you for pointing her out.
Thank you. My name is Waldo Jimenez. I'm from El Salvador. In the panel, you talked about the crime in the financial system and how to prevent and combat. But what about the Bitcoin and the crypto? Is more dirty money in the crypto world?
Thank you. And final question on the right.
Hello, my name is Arij. I am a legal specialist at the Oversight Anti-Corruption Authority in Saudi Arabia. My question is regarding the lawyers reporting in any suspicious acts. Wouldn't this be like a conflict in like the privacy information and the disclosure of the information of their clients, as well as breaching the NDAs? Thank you.
Thank you so much. The first question was about Bitcoin and crypto. Gabriel, I kind of feel like it falls in your bucket if you
Not only
want to
me.
talk about it. El Salvador, no?
No, yeah.
I can comment.
I would love to hear from you guys as well. But yeah, I think there's a huge gap, financially speaking, about how crypto can fill the pockets of the political parties in some of our countries. There's money going to politicians, going to officers in El Salvador, where the Bitcoin is legal, by using these wallets, these crypto wallets, and there's no accountability on this. And this brings a huge problem because, I mean, we cannot know where the money comes from. That's very simple, but that's very difficult to tackle as well. So I think that some countries in Africa, there was a country trying to follow the example that was led by El Salvador by stating the Bitcoin as a legal tender, but later, a month later, it was set back because it brings a lot of problems, and there's a lot of transparency about this. And I'm very deep. I mean, the FMI, the IMF in English, is concerned about how this is developing in El Salvador. And right now, El Salvador is trying to acquire a huge loan to finance the public means, but the condition is to eliminate this Bitcoin law in El Salvador. But the presidency won't do this, or we haven't seen any signs that President Bukele is eager to get rid of this law. So it is very annoying because El Salvador is a very poor country. We need money, we need more investment, but this kind of laws, the Bitcoin law, is damaging our country. Yeah.
Thank you, Gabriel. This was the Central African Republic where they decided not to. But they still are going to tokenize natural resources, which is something to worry about as well. Raymond, did you want to comment?
Yeah. Crypto, the most secretive forms of crypto, let's be clear, it's one of the categories of digital currencies. There are about 10,000 varieties of digital currencies. Bitcoin is among the most secretive. There are other kinds of digital money that is not so secret. Indeed, every central bank in the world that I know of is looking to create digital currencies. I speak to a lot of universities, and I always predict how many questions will be asked before crypto will come up. For the last half dozen examples, it's been the first question asked by university students. And I give them a couple of answers. One, if you're going to put your money in the most secretive of the cryptocurrencies, don't for a single moment think that you're making an investment. You're making a gamble. This is not an investment, it's a gamble. And the second thing I tell them to understand, recognize that it has only narrative value. That is to say, it can be talked up and it can be talked down, but that's its value, a narrative value. When you look at Bitcoin and the other most secret kinds of digital currencies, recognize that those are the ultimate separation of economic systems from any control by governments. And I think that's a major part of what I refer to as the existential threat to the 21st century. It is the complete separation of the ability of governments to control that kind of money. To me, that's not a good thing. But I do recognize digital currencies are a reality. The most secretive of them, I think, are dangerous.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Raymond.
just a word, of course, to support what Mr. Baker said, but volatile, not so much a currency that a reserve of assets. The currency we have to monitor with much interest what central banks are trying to do by collectively reflecting about a central bank digital currency. And maybe this initiative will be more reassuring for the general opinion, and that will be the currency. Here, crypto the secrecy. There will be always opaque things, and hopefully it will decline. But for the moment, indeed, it's not much a currency because of its volatility.
100% digital coins are here to stay. And finally, Ilze, talking about the lawyers reporting.
Just very quickly on crypto, few sentences. I think that the very important thing is to understand that in FATF environment, FATF Financial Action Task Force, which defines what is enabler and allows us to speak today about the enabling. Also, some 5 years ago, that was a very trendy topic, how to deal with crypto, with digital assets, what kind of threat they possess. And it turned out, by analysis also of financial intelligence units, financial supervisors, that the threat level is not so high. And by the way, crypto is more easy traceable, from time to time, depending on one or another, the type of the assets, compared to the cash, for example, which is still the king. And if somebody asked the question about crypto, I would say, let's go back to the roots and let's still try to investigate something which is very simple. Let's try to focus on those cash transactions in those suitcases that are going over the borders, and that is even more important at this stage to understand this type of crime. But on lawyers, I said I'm a lawyer, and I am also obliged to report when I am the lawyer. Right now, I have terminated my position as a 20th law. So there is no contradiction between being a lawyer and reporting suspicious transaction. That is the question that all lawyers always ask me if I lecture and talk to lawyers a lot, to notaries, to auditors, for example. They believe that there is some contradiction, but there's no. The only thing is when the lawyer is not required to report and to screen its customer account is when the lawyer represents the client in a court. And mostly very narrow criminal matters. Not all matters. And if we talk about, for example, assistance in mergers and acquisition case or M&A, or we advise clients on real estate transactions, that's not the case when some lawyer cannot check their client accounts, and report if there is a suspicion. Moreover, when I created the CIPE, or International Financial Task Force, one of the focuses was on UK, and I hope that there is somebody in the room from UK. You know how many companies from UK, registered companies, are around the world operating as shell companies. But interestingly enough, and I didn't know that before we created this task force, in UK you cannot buy any real estate, no yacht, no other luxury property without involvement of law firm. So law firms are basically the ones who created this very nice dream of city, who created this nice dream of Chelsea. And you know all those interesting stories about London becoming a paradise for money laundering. And even having this title, laundromats. So this is the case. Lawyers should be the same obliged to check their clients, report their clients, and that's not contradictory to our ethics.
And on that note, I would like to thank the panelists and the audience for your attention and great questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this really interactive and vibrant and dynamic panel. Just before we go, there are a couple of things that I want to deliver. This will be sort of a goodbye for today. For now, there are shuttle buses that would take you to the city if you want to go now. But there are two more options that you've got at 6:30. One masterclass and an opening ceremony. Anyone planning to attend the masterclass at 6:30? Would you raise your hand so we kind of have an idea? Anyone? Okay, good, thank you. Anyone planning to attend the opening ceremony, the dinner, which is also taking place here? Okay, some people have not decided yet, so this is why I will introduce the two options once again. How to rock the world when you start out with no resources. Masterclass with the speaker Gerard Ryle, who is the Director of International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, is going to take place right here on this stage at 6:30. The evening event, 6:30 as well, at Hall 1, which is the next building, a spectacular evening program. And the shuttles after those events will be taking you back to the city as well. So you can stay here longer, you can enjoy some sun, you can go to the city now, whichever you prefer. It just really matters that you come back here tomorrow, 10:20, to meet the Lithuanian president, and then delve into the nice and heavy and sensitive content with us again. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. I'm going to thank you for your attention, and I'm going to either meet you tonight or tomorrow morning. Enjoy yourselves, and thank you so much for being such a good audience. Thank you.